this. So welcome to another Whiskey Circus. Really pleased to have on Robert Caldwell from the Teeling Whiskey Company in Ireland. We seem to be getting quite a lot of Irish whiskey on the circus at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to you, Robert. If you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, who you work for, things like that, and then we'll go into what we've got planned.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Soren. Thanks for having me. And thank you all for coming. Yeah, my name's Rob, and I'm the global ambassador for the Teeling Whiskey Company. So it used to be my job to travel the world and drink whiskey, and now it's sit at home and drink whiskey. Not nearly as glamorous, but still pretty fun. Basically, yeah, bartender for God a long time. Almost half my life I've been behind a bar in some way, shape, or form. Did shifts, all over the place in North America, in Canada, a little bit around South America, London, Manchester, and then finally moved to Dublin in 2011. And there I made the mistake of falling in love with Irish whiskey and an Irish girl. So I have called Dublin home or Ireland home since then. So yeah, big fan of Irish whiskey. If you see my social media, you can see that goes back years before I even worked for Teeling. But I did have the pleasure of meeting Jack and Stephen Teeling, very early on in their career, where they were the ones doing my job. The guys that started Teeling Whiskey Company with their names on the bottle, they would be doing the whiskey shows and things like that. So I met them very early on into the growth of Teeling Whiskey Company. I was very close friends with the previous brand ambassador. So when this job came up, I literally took a month off and just put together a presentation of how much I wanted this role. So I'm very proud to now be representing Teeling Whiskey, Irish whiskey, whiskey in general. So yeah, it's a fun job and exciting. For today in particular, we're going to my Irish girl story didn't end well. Well, I mean, my English girl story didn't end too well. So yeah, today I'm going to take you on a virtual tour. So we basically think of it like the Google Street View of inside a distillery. We've got the same cameras into the distillery, and I'm going to kind of navigate you around the inside of the Teeling Distillery, show you a little bit about the history, but not too much. Obviously, we could talk for hours and hours and hours on the history of Irish whiskey, of the history of whiskey and the growth. And that's, I mean, like you've probably all heard that many times over. More about the future of flavor, these looser classifications around Irish whiskey, why Irish whiskey is booming, and what we at Teeling are doing specifically to try and distance ourselves from the herd and kind of lead that new wave of innovation within Irish whiskey and whiskey in general. So yeah, I mean, feel free to throw things in the comments. I'll try and catch them. But yeah, let's take you to Dublin. Boom. All right. Can you guys see that okay? It wouldn't be a Zoom if I didn't at least ask.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. There we go. Let me just see if I can open the chat box as well.
Where in Dublin is it, Rob?
This is Newmarket Square. So, I mean, if you know Dublin, right downtown. It's walking distance from St. Patrick's Cathedral. You're talking like a 2-minute walk from St. Patrick's Cathedral. Maybe 10 minutes walk from Trinity. So yeah, like obviously no access to farmlands, really urban distillery with plenty of access to everything in Dublin. So right downtown Dublin. I don't know how to open the chat box, so we might just have to ignore it. Oh, there it is. Amazing. Here we go. All right, perfect. All right, let's kick off. So let this load for a wee bit. There we go. I'm just going to zoom over because, I mean, you're going to get a little bit more of an in-depth rather than a straightforward. I just want to kind of zoom out here so give you a sense of the area. So this is Newmarket Square, huge redevelopment. So this building is now gone. That building is now gone. That building is now gone. If you jump out here a little bit, there's this building is being renovated, and then this is almost finished. So the area you're seeing massive redevelopment. It's insane. It's good to see, I mean, it was always going to be a little bit of a a slow start. The Liberties area of Dublin is this area. It would have been historically kind of the outside the walls of the castle proper, which would have been Dublin Castle. This is important in the growth of the whiskey industry in Dublin, because this is where, you know, tanneries, coopers, blacksmiths, malting houses, breweries, and distilleries would have all once called home. So yeah, comparatively to some of the kind of more well-to-do areas of Dublin, like Merrion Square, where it's very kind of that very English-inspired architecture. Can't think of the name of the Dutch Billy architecture. Here in the Liberties, a little bit more urban, you know, a lot more kind of, you know, malting houses, warehouses, things like that. So it's nice to see a bit of redevelopment, but you also don't want to lose that history. Just behind the distillery over here is where Black Pits is, so the area now known as the Black Pits, which we'll talk about. And this is Newmarket Square, so a very important grain trading location, and tripartite poetry, I guess. Right, let's jump inside. Welcome to the Teeling Distillery. So if you've not been, very quick overview, this is where you would meet and decide on your tour. So can't really see it there, but that sign breaks down the type of tour experience that you would get. So the introductory tour is a tour, Teeling small batch and a cocktail, and then it's broken down by tasting. So depending on what experience you're going for. So if you want to try the Trinity range, if you want to try distillery exclusives, you want to try the vintage reserve, it's all there on the choice when you arrive. To the right there, we've got our cafe, so you can get yourself a coffee, a pastry, or a sneaky Irish coffee to go. Don't tell anyone about that one, secret or whatever. But what is in here is the exhibition space. I'm just going to quickly kind of show you an overview of the exhibition space. This is a self-guided section, so you can see, wait, let me see. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Just on the corner there. There. So it's self-guided. So you've got it in numbered sections. So essentially, it's a very kind of brief historical overview. So you kind of wander around there. The tours used to leave every 20 minutes. So if you came in at, you know, 1 minute past when a tour has just left, you've got 19 minutes or so to kind of wander around here, get a sense of the history of Dublin. So you can kind of see an overview. We are going through a bit of it, a renovation of this kind of room as well. But you can just kind of see, you know, that museum piece where you can kind of get a bit of breakdown on the Golden Triangle, the Great Dublin Whiskey Fire. Over here, you've got the big names in Irish whiskey. So you've got the George Rowe Distillery down here, John Jamieson, Powers Distillery. You've got some old kind of historic bottles, some old advertising posters on the category. And on this wall here, a bit of a timeline. So yeah, hundreds and hundreds of years of history really condensed into a couple of photos. So obviously not doing it justice, but it kind of gives you a sense of, you know, the provenance of the history. I think it's great to see that whiskey globally is really booming right now. You've got whiskey from all over the world. Obviously, Scotch, Irish, American, and Japanese. But you've also got Australian and Taiwanese and Indian and even, you know, Israeli whiskies and Czechoslovakian whiskies, or Slovakian whiskies. But I think it's a very geographically unique idea of whiskey. You know, every country has different rules and regulations around what they deem whiskey to be. So, you know, subtle differences in styles in every country. You know, for example, you can have a column distilled single malt in Slovakia. Great example. But very few have the provenance and the history of Irish whiskey. Obviously, Scotch does, American does, but you know, Australia hasn't even been a country as long as Irish whiskey has been a thing. So really, you know, long history to draw from. And then with the demise, which we'll kind of briefly touch on, and the rebirth, reclassification has come into Irish whiskey. So we've got that old world to draw from, but also this new world of looser classifications and regulations, and the demographic for Irish whiskey is far younger, far broader. So we're kind of best primed in this kind of global whiskey boom, in that we've got, hungry consumers looking to find new and exciting flavors, but also the history and tradition is there to draw from and draw inspiration from. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into, why Irish whiskey is booming. Great example, we're doubling every year, the fastest growing spirits category in the world. We've gone to 1976, there were 2 distilleries in Ireland. 1993, you had 4, 2 of which owned by the Teeling family. 2015 with Teeling, this Newmarket distillery, the first new distillery in Dublin in 125 years, you had about 6 or 7 distilleries. And then 5 short years after that, you're looking at 38 distilleries in Ireland. So yeah, very, very brief overview of the history, the complicated history of Irish whiskey. So before we jump into production, just want to introduce a Game of Thrones chair and Jack and Stephen Teeling. So these are the founders of the Teeling Whiskey Company. So there is Jack Teeling and his younger brother Stephen Teeling. So Jack is a managing director and Stephen is head of sales and marketing. So they obviously would have followed in their father's footsteps, but there's also ancestral links as far back as 1782 from the Teeling family. So whiskey industry is in their blood. But yeah, very important to say that the immediate Teeling family have been distilling in Ireland since the 1980s. So yeah, a lot of inspiration there of why they got into the whiskey industry, why they're so passionate about the whiskey industry. And yeah, as you can see, very, very young guys, my age. So, we're not trading on historical mash bills or recipes. These guys are very much involved in the day-to-day and very adept at changing as we go. We're not trading off something long forgotten. The guys that make the whiskey are very much the ones that are drinking modern whiskey. So again, another example of how we kind of constantly change, evolve, and come out with new products and things like that, which infinitely confuse marketeers having to try and put this into a narrative. But it's fun. We like whiskey. All right, so let's jump into production. What I'm going to do is actually skip ahead. I'm going to stop kind of jumping around. I'm just going to go to these slides. I want to show you something that not many people get to see. I like this one. This is a bird's eye view of the distillery. So here we go. So that's the entrance we came in. That's the exhibition space. This is the cafe. This second floor, so that's the tasting rooms. This is the Bang Bang bar. So Bang Bang is our main cocktail bar or main whiskey bar, named for a very historical figure called Bang Bang in the Dublin area. This is our gift shop. Some offices up top, but this is where the magic happens. Yeah, Bang Bang. He used to carry around one of those old keys, the big long kind of copper keys, and he'd hold it like a gun and shoot people. Bang Bang. So yeah, a bit of a character in the Liberties area of Dublin. His home was actually around here, where the distillery is located. So long gone. All right, so yeah, this is where the magic happens. So this is what we're going to be walking around. So it gives you a kind of idea. So we're going to be walking in here. We've got our mill, Lauderton, fermenters, Alison, Natalie, and Rebecca, our 3 lovely stills. But yeah, it gives you a sense of the room. I really like this. It's really cool. Right, we're going to start all the way down here at the mill. All right, so how are we doing for time? Oh, we're good. Oh God, what is going on? Shut up, Jack. I didn't even know that happened. I've never presented with sound before. All right, so we got our 3 main ingredients. So we have water, sugar, and yeast. So we obviously, depending on what alcohol we're making, and I know you guys are a lot more informed whiskey fans, so I won't go into too much detail about the styles of alcohol or anything like that. But if you do have any questions, throw it into the comment pane. But I am going to kind of gear this particular tour as to a lot more educated, because I'm assuming that's what you guys are. But let me spin this around. So I like to show off the mill because you don't normally see a mill in a distillery experience. Obviously, when you're milling up the grain to extract those starches and sugars, that it's ground up into a fine flour normally. That flour can exit the mill, it enters the atmosphere, it's extremely flammable, and it's hazardous to breathe. So normally they're in hermetically sealed rooms. You know, you can see them through windows and things like that. But what sets us apart is this middle section here, just there. So that's the mill proper down there. This is our hopper. Think of it like a giant funnel, funneling the grain into the mill. But this middle section is what we call a wet mill. So essentially, instead of kind of grounding up our grains into a flour-like grist, it's spraying the grains down. So it obviously the gravity of a wet grain falls to the bottom, less like a flour, more like a porridge. Because obviously you're going to get hot water added in the lauterton anyway. So essentially it allows two things. One, we don't need to change the spacing on our mill to grind up malted and unmalted barley. So obviously being Irish whiskey, you know, we're using malted and unmalted barley. That unmalted barley, that husk, a lot more sturdy, a lot tougher to get into and extract those sugars. Obviously, malting process really breaks down the husk. So to mill, malted and unmalted barley, you normally need to change the spacing on the mill. But with that wet mill, we don't need to do that as much, although we have definitely broken our mill before. So essentially, yeah, our grist is almost like a porridge and then transferred directly into our lauterton. So that's why we can have our mill in the visitor center experience. Very loud machine. And I wish you could smell the room too. I think we are doing malted barley at the moment, again, because of the success of Black Bits. All right. So we've got our lauterton, obviously. So we're extracting those sugars from the grain husk. So we're essentially adding water at 70 degrees Celsius. I can't seem to get a good view inside. I think it's a little empty at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys know in lauterton, but yeah, think of it like porridge. All we want to do is extract those sugars, leave the grain husk. So we do that with the introduction of hot water, creating a wort, W-O-R-T. Think of it like a sugar water. It drains out the false floor. We sparge with more hot water, extracting as much sugar as possible. And the draft or the spent grain or the husk that is left behind, the sugarless husk that is left behind, is shipped out through these red pipes to our animal farms. Irish whiskey has a remarkable history and symbiotic relationship with farmers and the introduction of grain and the reintroduction of spent grain. At a time throughout history previous to, I guess, English occupation, where the boom of whiskey and brewing industries kind of exploded through that export of mass amounts of grain flooding Dublin city centre. When that stopped, there needed to be that symbiotic relationship. There needed to be a reason for farmers to continue the burgeoning whiskey industry, so they introduced this recycling of spent grains through a coin-based system where they would sell their grains to the distilleries, receive a coin that could be then transferred or redeemed for spent grain. So obviously they'd save money. That symbiotic relationship begun there. Obviously nowadays we have big malting houses in Ireland, the Malting House of Ireland being a great example, that supplies grain to a multitude of the big distilleries in Ireland, as well as Heineken, Guinness, and the big breweries as well. So fairly big business in Ireland. But below our feet here, we have our wort. We have our sugar water. All we need to do is introduce yeast. And something that excites us very much is our yeast, because we use a combination of distiller's yeast, obviously, and white wine yeast. We've used a number of different yeast strains and combinations. Obviously, Alex's background as a brewer, he gets really geeky about yeast strains. He's used brewer's yeast, obviously, but he's also used a number of different engineered and natural yeasts. But we've kind of, at the moment, pretty happy to use a combination of distiller's yeast and white wine yeast from South Africa. What we're looking for are esters of pineapple and passion fruit. Both of these are present in the Black Pits and the single pot still, being Dublin distilled releases. So we use these Oregon pine, these 10,000 liter Oregon pine washbacks for the first 24 hours of fermentation. So essentially we pitch our yeast in the wort for about 24 hours, and then they're moved to the stainless steel for the remainder of anywhere from 5, or let's say 4 to 7 days. Again, it's a long fermentation, but this is probably where, it's the biggest backlog of time. So we're try and have a backlog of distillates ready to go, or pot ales or washes ready to go. So again, it's not a choice. Like, even if we were up to speed and doing a full run of distillation every day, we wouldn't just do enough to run the still once. Does that make sense? So we wouldn't probably run the full fermentation for the full 7 days. So I'd likely run about 3 days if we wanted to go from mill to still in the same day, if that makes sense, like in the quickest time possible. But because that's the biggest kind of bottleneck, was the word I was looking for, that kind of screwed up everything there. We tend to have a lot going on. So we have the 4 stainless steel fermenters at 20,000, and the wooden pine washbacks, the Oregon pine washbacks. So we run 2 of these a day for 24 hours, and then into the stainless steel. Any questions about yeast strains or things like that? I mean, we love our yeast. Yeast is a funny one. A monoism, think of it like pollen. It can't move anywhere. So essentially, it secretes these pheromones or these esters in order to attract fruit flies, in order to take it to the next, batch of rotting fruit. So the flavors that you can extract come from the area, from the yeast, or where the yeast calls home. So if you've got, flavors of white wines, these passion fruits and pineapples of South Africa, these are found in the yeast, because it needs to attract the fruit flies from that region in order to take it to the next rotting fruit. So a lot of work to be done in extracting these esters in yeast strains. We've done a little bit of experimentation in the multitude of yeast strains out there, but there's a lot of work to be done. I think it was a bit of a hot topic at the Whiskey Exchange show this year. A lot of experiments being done, but what we're finding now is there's a lot of variations in flavor from, the terroir, if you want to get down that route, to specialty grains, so roasted malts, to the yeast strain, to distillation, to maturation, it cuts as well, to maturation, to blending. There's so much variation of flavor that we think, it hasn't really been fully fleshed out. So exciting future of Irish whiskey. So we're not going to get into that. That's someone else's job today. All right, so back on track. So meet Alison, Natalie, and Rebecca. So this is Alison, 15,000 liters, Natalie, 10,000 liters, and Rebecca, 9,000 liters. Puts us squarely as a mid-sized distillery in Ireland, producing about 600,000 liters of pure alcohol per year at half capacity. And to give you an example, the big guys, so your Tullamore Dew, your Jamesons, they're producing about 10, 11 million liters of pure alcohol per year. So yeah, I mean, we're very much a mid-sized distillery, and then some of the smaller distilleries in Ireland producing 5 figures per year. So yeah, very, very mid-sized. But we're not rushing, that this is, it fits squarely in the realm of our business plan. Even so much so that, yeah, we're running at half capacity, so we don't absolutely knacker our machines or our equipment, and also allows us to run 33% of our production schedule to new product development, or NPD. So this is exactly how we came up with our peated malt. A lot of our initial projections were 66% based on making single pot still and single malt, where Alex Casco, our master distiller, master blender, dedicated a little bit of that time to doing peated malts, doing double distilled malts, and different bits and pieces. And then, you taste them and go, that's fantastic. So that's how we come up with some of our interesting experiments. There are a couple like that kind of have being distilled during that 33% slot that haven't yet seen the light of day, but it's exciting. As you know, whiskey industry is a marathon, not a sprint. So yeah, something very romantic, something that we did, years ago, may not even see the light of day in our lifetime. So really exciting. I think it's quite romantic. All right, so back to distillation. So we put 15,000 liters into Allison. We run that at roughly about 88 degrees Celsius. We're looking for a low wine of about 27% ABV. We're taking the middle, say 55, hard cut, and I mean we do narrow cuts, but again, being triple distilled, there's not a lot of return. Decent amount of reflux, being such a wide pot still. Let's see if we can get a better view. But yeah, we run Allison twice to get 10,000 liters for Natalie. Natalie runs at about 83 degrees Celsius, so we're looking at about 55% off the back of Natalie. And then into Rebecca. We run Rebecca a lot of the time now, so we are triple distilling for a large percentage of what we do. We run Rebecca right at 78.1 degrees Celsius, the boiling point of alcohol. We can get a spirit at about 88% proof. Where Ireland's different from Scotland, we use a distilled water. We don't use natural water sources. That's why you don't really talk about that too much in Irish whiskey. You've got the Speyside and the River Spey. A lot of the story around Scotch distilleries in Ireland, not so much, because we use distilled water, so you can't really talk about the provenance and the history of water sources in Ireland. Yeah, Charlie, yeah. Alison, Natalie, and Rebecca are named after Jack Teeling's 3 daughters. So a bit of a nod there to the Teeling family. All right. Sorry, I missed a few questions. Yeah, story behind their names. Yeah, they're named after Jack Teeling's 3 daughters. All right, cool. So this is the very scientific part of our tour. It's all monitored by the control room just over here. So you can see someone's hard at work there. I think that's, I can't tell. I'll just be making up a name at this point. Yeah, so everything very monitorable. It all feeds back into the computer system. Changes in temperature here, changes in cut points there, and changes in pressures. It's all about obtaining certain ABVs is what we're looking for in that regard, depending on what we're making too, and depending on what we're distilling. So into our maturation space. We've just updated this room. You can see there, even this picture hasn't been completely updated. This is supposed to say Teeling, so Teeling, but we were a little bit ahead of ourselves here. But this room is just to simulate the inside of a barrel, just to kind of lead up to our maturation space. You can see my internet is a bit slow. I don't know why that's blurry. But yeah, just a bit of an update to kind of give you a sense of what's happening inside a barrel, kind of for the average consumer, just explaining, what's happening inside the barrel, kind of allegories to lungs, breathing in and out of those grains of wood, taking with the flavor, talking about angel share, reinforcing that older whiskey is not necessarily better whiskey, it's just rarer whiskey, certain things like that you guys well know and understand by this stage. But we just want to get up to kind of this visual space where we talk about coloring and angel share from a visual standpoint. So you talk about a whiskey at 0 years old, or a distillate straight off the still, completely filling that barrel, not yet a whiskey. We move to barrel number 1, where you've got officially 3 years old. You can see it starts to have a little bit of that hay amber-like quality to it at 3 years old. This third rectangle here is small batch. So this is actually a rum cask, ex-bourbon into a rum cask. So you're talking between 5 and 6 years old. So between 4 and 6 in an ex-bourbon cask, then transferred to this rum cask for about 6 to 12 months. So you can see there, we've lost around, say, 35% of volume, and it's really starting to get quite dark. And this last one is representative of our vintage reserve. So it's roughly about 24, 25 years old. We've lost about 60% of volume, but it's really starting to get quite amber and golden in color. Unfortunately, Jamie, we don't age anything in the distillery bar these 3 casks. Because it's where 1 million people live, that's the big problem. You know, you can't, things like the Great Whiskey Fire happen where, you know, these rick houses or these barrel maturation warehouses are quite flammable, quite dangerous to be in the city center. So our maturation warehouse is more of a convenient location from the initial years of the Teeling company. So if you know a little bit about Teeling family, the previous distillery they owned was the Cooley Distillery up in Louth, like someone said, and it's in Carlingford, or it's in Dundalk, which is, you know, just east of Dundalk. Sorry, it's in Cooley, the town, and it was a mile down the road of the Cooley Peninsula, or the Cooley Distillery. So basically what happened when Beam bought the family's previous distillery, Jack Teeling negotiated tens of thousands of barrels of maturing family stock, and then just found the nearest warehouse close to that, because they just bought all the whiskey they could, you know, not a lot of money to transfer it somewhere in the country. So they just moved it to an old Coca-Cola bottling facility a mile down the road from Cooley, and that has continued to be our maturation warehouses to this day. So when we go visit the warehouse, we actually drive past the Cooley Distillery. So yeah, we mature. So we send about a tanker a week up to Greenore to our maturation facility, and then yeah, from there it goes to the bottling plants. We do some bottling in-house at Greenore, but yeah, that's where we mature our whiskies. But the ones in the distillery, so these are named after Stephen Teeling's 3 daughters, or 2 daughters, sorry, I should say. So obviously Stephen's daughters were born after the construction of the Teeling Distillery. So they get some of the first whiskey to be distilled in Dublin in almost 50 years. So they have barrels filled from their birthday, and then obviously they'll have the greatest 18-year-old birthday party you've ever known. But yeah, they have some whiskey named after them. So you've got Zoe there and Holly there, named after Stephen Teeling's daughters. And then this barrel here is one of the first barrels that we produced in Dublin. So it's you know, the first single pot still to be made in Dublin in 1976, a long time. Just to give you a kind of an overview of how important that is, the first whiskey we released from Dublin when we opened in 2015, so obviously released in 2018, did at the time break the world record for the most ever spent on a new distillery's whiskey. So obviously now that's been broken. But yeah, it was a it's not a brag on the whiskey, not saying it's the greatest whiskey in the world, although we did win world's best single malts. But no, that single pot still is a piece of history. And a lot of people wanted to be, you know, have and hold a piece of that history. Really exciting to see Dublin return to its distilling capital. He'd be lucky to talk to you. All right. Back over here. So one for you guys specifically. We've used up to 100 different casks in the maturation of Teeling whiskies. So yeah, I mean, this is what you don't normally do on an average tour because it starts to confuse people. But yeah, there's so much variation just in maturation. Every single cask is going to produce a subtly different whiskey. And in that, you're just talking about 250-liter ex-bourbon barrels. Then you've got to add in the size and shape of the cask. Then you add in the seasoning. So is it ex-bourbon? Is it sherry? Is it port? Is it Madeira? Is it Malaga? Is it vermouth? Is it gin? Is it tequila? And then, you know, how long it's been in the cask. So all of that variation that we just mentioned now is just within oak. And it comes right back full circle to what I said at the start with a loose classification of Irish whiskey. we can use other non-porous hardwoods in the maturation of Irish whiskey. So multiply that vast number of influence from oak into cherrywood, acacia, amberana, chestnut, mizunura. There's a wealth of flavor out there, and that's not even mentioning the blenders. So again, what we're seeing today is less of an emphasis on age statement whiskey and more, and this was led even by Japanese before kind of Irish saw the rebirth, the kind of, again, the artistry of a blender, almost in the echelons of talking about them like a chef, like a Michelin star chef, taking these myriad of flavors and balancing them and blending them in such a way that really can't be replicated by machine. So there's a very big spotlight put on blenders nowadays, as we see, it's quite a difficult job, and really, really exciting because not only, I think someone said that they're drinking the single malt. I think that's a great example at a medium level price point of what I'm talking about. It's all well and good for a brand ambassador like me to say, oh, we're innovative and we use all these different casks. You can do that. If you've got the money, you can definitely do that. But it takes absolute skill to be able to showcase why you do that. It's not just a box ticking exercise of this is the rum finish, this is the tequila finish, it's how they interact with one another, how they mingle with one another, how they symphonize. It is like a symphony. When you see an orchestra play, there's all these different instruments and they know when to play to complement one another. The same goes for really skilled whiskey blenders. And I think that single malt is an absolutely phenomenal example of how 5 different wine-influenced single malts all play well with one another, interject certain flavor notes at certain points in the experience, and all sing in harmony. So I think that, we're going to start to see a lot more kind of emphasis placed on blending. There are some truly phenomenal blenders out there in the world that certainly don't need me to give them praise. But give them more flavors to play with. It's like a Michelin star chef working at McDonald's playing with 5 flavors and then going to the world's best restaurants and seeing, foraged ingredients and farm to table ingredients and just letting them play. You're going to get some truly spectacular results. So exciting future within Irish whiskey, within global whiskey as we slowly evolve the whole category. So that's what we're doing at Teeling, a little bit anyway, is trying to challenge these expectations of what whiskey is, which you've probably seen. Just last year we released some traditional flavors of whiskey, a PX finish, age statement, and then we've gone completely left field and done a ginger beer finish or a pineapple rum finish. We've done vatted whiskeys, we do age statement whiskey. So there's, I think the main kind of point is, we're a flavor focused company. Our marketing team is 2 people, whereas our blending team is 4. We compete with Jameson or these other big brands. We compete with them not on marketing, not on spend, not on flavor. We've won 300 international awards for our whiskey now, and that's everything we do. Create the best tasting whiskey we can, and hopefully it incites a response. We don't expect you to like all of Teeling whiskeys, but hopefully you can see, where the range comes from. Like someone that likes peated whiskey might appreciate where we go with black pits. Even someone that doesn't like peated whiskey could see where it sits and how it's different from single pot still, from the single grain, from the single malt, or most importantly, from the small batch, where it sits within the spectrum of flavors within whiskey, and why we released so many different whiskeys in general. Just coming to the end here. So this is our tasting room. This is the Bang Bang Bar. So this is where we normally host people. So you've got a brand ambassador in the middle, or a I missed that one. Normally a tour guide would stand in the middle there, and everyone would kind of stand around the outside with some cool little alcoves here. This is the Bang Bang Bar, so you can get some vintage reserve whiskies, some cocktails, Irish coffees, the best Irish coffee we'll ever had. So if we do manage to get to traveling again this year, please reach out to me and I'll make sure you get the best Irish coffee you've ever had at the Teeling Distillery. Some of our whiskies there. You can see someone's snuck into the 30-year-old. Look at them, lucky them. Our gift shop, things look a little different at the moment as all of this has been packed away and we just ship things now. Certainly a different environment to what it was when this is pictured, but hopefully we can get back to some semblance of normality soon. So yeah, I think that's enough of my tour. I'm starting to get it parched, so I'm going to enjoy a whiskey and answer some of your questions. So let's get rid of this. Open up this. Sorry, I missed some of the